Jack, I want to talk to you a little bit about teaching.
Okay.
There are a lot of general questions I could ask you, but I want to introduce this subject with something that you wrote.
Okay.
You wrote an article a number of years ago for the Texas Tech Law Review that may have the longest title
Oh yeah.
in the history of law reviews, including Sandy Koufax and Ty Cobb, as I recall,
Right.
being in the title. But in that article, there was a footnote 7.
Okay.
And in that footnote, you're actually footnoting a statement where you say, lawyering like baseball is a construction of an ethic, a world, a way of life, and a truth. And this is
Let me stop right there,
Okay.
because you asked me earlier about how did you get to the theology. Boom.
Yeah.
It leaps out at you when you say it that way.
And am I correct that this was part of that symposium that Tim Floyd and Daisy Floyd had you
It was.
do?
It was, and it was one of the nicest things that I think has ever happened to me. There were maybe 20, 25 people that wrote for that symposium, and Tim asked the law review there to pick out the person that they wanted to come talk to them at their senior dinner, and they picked me.
Isn't that nice?
So yeah, it was very nice, and Tim and Daisy put me up in a bed and breakfast there that they said, oh, this is a very historic building. It's the oldest one in town. I think it was built in 1930.
Old has a different meaning
Old
in
has
Lubbock.
a different meaning in Lubbock, Texas. But then Tim took me out, and we paid homage to Buddy Holly's grave. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the footnote to that
Yeah.
statement says that this understanding of lawyering is very important to me because I understand what I am doing as a law professor as introducing students to a way of life, and I cannot make sense of anything that I do outside of this way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think I would. I think I would hold on to that. Yeah, I think that's right. I'd also say that it's that way in all teaching, whether you want it to be or not. And there's another article. It's a later article about. On one of Mark Jones's symposia, and it was about the practical wisdom and so forth. And anyhow, in that article, I say that a little bit better, I think. Not so vague. It's just using a way of life to make sense out of what you're doing. And the other one draws upon Polanyi to say that better.
Well, and I think the article you're talking about maybe, or you may have said it many places, but you do say this again in the article that's in the Flourishing, book that was put together, and there you describe it as what your job as a law professor is to move students toward that ideal.
Yeah.
Ideal of character.
That's right, but it does. The more important point for me right now is not that that's what I was doing. There's nothing unique about that. It's that everybody is doing that, and it's a question of being conscious of it or not. That there are implications, even at the law school level where you're dealing with older students, there are implications to the way in which you teach everything that go far beyond what you're teaching. That you are always saying more than you think you are when you're talking to students who are learning from you, especially from those students who respect you and pay attention and the like. So, for example, in the first year of law school, even though there are no clients that peer in most courses, even hypothetically in first year courses, you are nevertheless teaching them about the relationship they are to have with their clients, in the way in which you describe the law, and in the way in which you talk to them. You are teaching them about whether or not there is something called the law. You're teaching them about law as an alternative to force and not reducible to the political. All of those things are implicit in your teaching. There's no way that you can just teach technique and let it go with that. It always, and I've used this phrase several times, it always points beyond itself. It's always more. And what I want to do is be very conscious of that and think about my response to every question that the student asks. And how am I picturing the law, the world of the law, and the world to them? This is, I can see that for some students, especially older students, it would be pretentious to think that that's important. But the first year of law school is such a traumatic and transitional moment for people in their own thinking, as is, and we often miss out on this, as is the sixth semester of the third year of law school. Those are traumatic and transitional moments, and it's in those moments that people end up taking lessons that shape the way they think about the world.
So, am I right then that, in the sense that the kind of teaching you're talking about could be described as teleological, right? That there is an ideal towards which you are, whether you mean to or not, you're moving.
Yes.
Moving the student.
Yes, exactly.
Imagine for a minute that you're talking to somebody who is about to be a law professor for the first time. Okay. What would you say to them about that? How will you do it? I mean, we can explain what it is, but how do you do it?
Okay.
I don't understand.
I wouldn't
everything
say
you
it
do.
to them because it would be lost on them. I
Okay.
wouldn't do it that way. I
All
wouldn't
right,
say,
let's say it to me. I've been doing this 20 years.
okay. No, I'll
Help me.
show them. I can't tell them. I can show
Okay.
them. And I've tried to do this with mixed results. So there's a new professor who's teaching a course, tax law, or torts.
Pick a first year course, because that's where you...
Torts,
Okay.
contracts. And I go in, as we do with new professors and as we do with when people are being evaluated, I go in and observe the course. Okay. I then write up all my notes and I'd meet with that person and we talk about it at great length, often over a lunch or going on longer than that. I would then try to point out to them how, as a student, I might perceive the world that they're picturing to me. And often it can be hard to hear that, do you really want them to think of clients that way? That's often part of it. Because the image that they have of clients in the first year course is usually pretty awful. Image they have of judges, pretty awful. Every opinion is written just to give the law professor an opportunity to take it apart with the unspoken words, that idiot.
It can get pretty snarky.
It gets very snarky, and you want students to be analytical, to be careful in their thinking, and you don't need to do it that way. Just the simple thing of, occasionally you should say that there's something good in the way in which this judge has written this opinion, even though I disagree with it. There's a standard here for evaluating these opinions. It doesn't turn upon whether I agree with them or not. And that students thinking that way, coming to think that way, really crucial to who they're going to be in the practice of law and whether the practice is going to have meaning to them in their lives. At least it seemed to me it was. And that for the most part that was going on, something that was happening unconsciously without the professor reflecting upon it very much.
And it almost seems to me you're talking about something like empathy. In the, our old friend Mike Smith used to write about and talk about
Right.
the empathy a writer needs to have for the reader. Say
Or the empathy, or the forgiveness the reader needs to have of the writing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that if you, basically putting yourself in the student's shoes who are novices to the profession,
Right.
gathering their initial impressions of all of these players and of the role,
Right.
that you're presenting the wrong image.
You are.
And modeling the wrong behavior.
Yeah, and often the role of the lawyer and the role of the legal conversation and the role of the judges is all diminished in that. So many times the implicit implication of what the lawyer is doing is rhetorical manipulation to make as much money as a lawyer can. And jokes about it.
Right.
That bother me. That,
Right.
So,
Yeah, a fair bit of this seems to come
and
from
then when that comes back to them a few courses later, oh, these students are awful. They're hopeless. This generation doesn't understand.
it may come from going for the cheap laughs with the.
May very well. Yeah.
I'm going to take the prerogative here of asking you something that is particularly important to me, and that has to do with overtly trying to teach these things to first-year law students in a course such as we have in the first year.
Oh, Pat, you do it so much better than anyone else.
Well,
I could not begin to teach that course. I tried in the way you were doing it.
Well, I'm asking your advice. I mean, you know the course well. You've seen what we do. There are other schools who are interested in what we do.
Right.
And who will no doubt have improvements for us, and we can learn from them and they can learn from us. What should we do differently? What could we do better?
In that course?
Yeah. That's what I said. It's a prerogative, a personal prerogative to ask for your advice. And I understand you've disagreed with everybody you've respected. I'll assume your respect and welcome the disagreement.
This is not a disagreement with anything. Remember when I said the Billow Moulton book, Gary Billow is no longer with us, unfortunately. I think B. Moulton still is, was the first effort that I saw to take seriously the practice of law as a matter for study. That it was, something you could think about. And, well, your course is doing exactly that. And it's not doing it in the clinic. It's doing it for all the students in huge classes. And that's terrific. And if you ask people outside of the legal profession about it, they'd say, well, of course. When they get here, you teach them about what the practice is, what it means, how to become a part of it, and so forth and so on. Of course you do that to get them started on the process of acquiring a taste for it, as we talked about before. The only thing that comes to mind is that I also see that course as potentially responding to some of the objections that I just made to other things that are done in the first year. So I think I would want your course to at least, in part, to try a way of reading the law that is more respectful of it than they're going to hear in the other courses. Because I think that's part of the missing puzzle there. That the simple, there's a good article by James Boyd White that's part of a book that would give you some guidelines for how to do that, what questions to ask. That would allow them to evaluate that opinion on criteria that are internal to judging. So the quality doesn't depend upon whether they agree with the outcome or not. It's measured in its own terms, in other words. You could start by asking them, what's good about this opinion? What does this judge do well? So I think that would be a good part of the course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as time goes on, if other things occur
you've
to
already
you-
got so much going on in that course. It's hard to imagine adding anything else.
Well, we've tried everything. You're not teaching anymore.
No,
Do you miss it?
no.
Tell me why.
Okay, it's
You did it for 35 plus years.
40.
Right? 40 years.
38 years here and 2 years of teaching at Antioch, so it's 40 years. Well, I'll tell you why. I miss students. I don't miss teaching. I was one of those people that I worried about every single class, and I had to prepare for every single class. Taught evidence, I think, 25 years, didn't matter. There was an hour or two of preparation needed beforehand. I get nervous before each class as to how it was going to go. Every single seminar I did, I walked in the seminar thinking, oh, gosh, this is not going to work. They're not going to say anything, And so each morning when I woke up for 40 years, with the exception of Saturday, because I taught every single day, I wasn't one of those who looked for days off during the week. I taught every single day, every single year. First thing in the morning when I woke up, I thought about the classes that I had that day, and I would always have the book, the text, with me at home, and I'd go over it quickly in the morning just to get on the wavelength. Then teach the classes, and how the class went determined how I felt about the day and how I felt about myself. So that those 1 hour periods or 15-minute periods, or depending upon what years it was, 16-minute periods were crucial how I felt. If it went badly, I didn't go home and beat the dog. I never did that, but I might have growled. And then there'd be a period 2 or 3 hours after class where I wouldn't think about class, and then it'd kick in again. I'd start thinking about the next day. And almost every single night, I would look over the textual material and go over my notes again. Every day except Saturday. Sunday, it would be Sunday afternoon that I do that, in addition to thinking about what's coming on Monday. And I often doubled up the classes on Monday. I would think about how the week was going to work and where it fits and so forth and so on. Well, when I stopped doing that, summers, of course, I didn't do that, and took breaks from it and worked on scholarship and the like, but it still felt like I'm getting back into this soon. But when I stopped doing that for good, which was this last June, it felt like there was this huge burden that had been lifted. I didn't have to go through that routine anymore. Didn't have to have the day turn upon a performance, and so I don't miss that.
Gretchen always told me that I was never as bad or as good as I thought I was. So
Yeah.
to try to even out
The other thing is that I'm still distracted most of the time, as Lainey would tell you, or a lot of the time. Because I'm working on an article, I'm always thinking about the next article, or if it's not a clear article, it's ideas that are going to play out eventually in an article. But I'd also be distracted by the course, so I was not really there a lot of the time. And but yeah, I'm glad to be out of that. I still figuring out what retirement is and what my identity should be, and so forth and so on, and what comes next. And so far, I've done a lot of writing in retirement already, and a lot of that's been dictated to me by things that I had previously committed to or by requests that I said yes to.
Right.
And there's going to come a time where it's more clear decision on my part to continue with the writing part.
And I want to get to asking you about, of course, what comes next and get you to reflect a little bit overall. But I want to take a tangent here because I forgot to ask you about something when we talked last time in terms of your, well, really a few things about your life. So we're going to do this a little bit out of order. But you spent a fair bit of time and energy dealing with what's known around here as the Fall Line
Freeway, yeah.
And the protection of the Okmulgee.
That went on for about 15 years.
Yeah. But tell us that story about what was happening.
I won't give you the long version. The long version I've done in classes before, and it takes about 2 hours. But I was also doing it to give students an example of what lawyers can do to influence decision makers other than filing lawsuits. The potential that we have for the lawsuit there was not great, and we made the threat frequently. But
and for people who see this and hear it who don't know the area, I mean, you may need to explain a little bit about what the Indian Mounds are and the Fall Line Freeway was to be and so on.
The Okmulgee National Monument is here in Macon, on the other side of the river. It was originally supposed to be about 2,000 acres and includes something called the Lamar Mound, which is the only extant spiral staircase mound left probably in the country, I know on the East Coast. But this was during the 30s and the money wasn't available. The money that was raised by the Women Club here, and then they got a little bit from the Department of Interior. The Women's Club got involved because people were riding motorcycles on top of these Indian mounds that were 2,000, 3,000, some of them 5,000 years old, and destroying them. Rather than 2,000 acres being preserved, there were 600 acres preserved. And the Lamar Mound was separated from the main part. It was protected, but it was separated from the main part. So there was all this land in between. Well, sure enough, that's where the Georgia Department of Transportation decides they want to put a highway. Don't want to say that way. It wasn't the Georgia Department of Transportation, it was politicians that decided. And there's a long story behind that of dealings behind the scene where they were controlling what the Department of Transportation was doing in their decision making. Georgia Department of Transportation, if truth be told, would never have considered that, but then the Fall Line Freeway, which connects Augusta with Columbus, would not have come up through Macon. Getting it to come up through Macon, which required a dogleg up, was a political deal that was worked out with a very important Speaker of the House who lived in Warner Robins at the time. He got the state fair in exchange for this. Now, justifications for it, they wanted it to come up there to give an additional access to the interstate for what's called the brownfields back behind Macon to encourage their further development. Part of it went over wetlands, and that meant that it was going to have to be built as a bridge. It would have been one of the longest bridges in the country and one of the most expensive bridges in the country. And they got Senator Nunn to get the money authorized to do that. Laney, my wife, was a school teacher at the time. She took a group of students out to the mounds. They were going to look at the artifacts and look at the burial mounds, but also the ceremonial mounds. You can walk inside, and the most valuable thing out there is there's this floor that remains from 3,000 years ago that shows the way they would sit, and they would drink the black drink, and it was a religious and political ceremony. And Sylvia Flowers, is one of the rangers out there, was doing this with the students. She started talking to Laney about this Fall Line Freeway stuff. And I knew nothing about it. Laney knew nothing about it. Most of Macon knew nothing about it. And Sylvia was afraid that it was going to happen, and she talked about how horrible it was. It precluded the possibility of ever putting the mounds back together, of ever extending it to the area that was supposed to be protected. And worst, it divided the Lamar Mound from the rest of it. The traffic noise and air pollution, everything else would make it a much less attractive place. It was a very, very environmentally sensitive region, one of the most environmentally sensitive left in other than wetlands. In part of it is wetland, left in Georgia. And for the justifications for it were poor. They hadn't been thought through. Now, Sylvia talked about the opposition to Muskogee Creek. Creek is in parentheses. We call them creeks. They're Muskogees. Nation and tribal towns to this. Muskogees don't have a veto over this. It's not. They don't own it. It's not their land. Nothing like that. But the federal government and the state government as well is supposed to consult with them and so forth. This is the land where, in their terminology, they first sat down, which means that it's where they became a people. It is as central to their history, more so, as Gettysburg is to ours. It's part of their identity in the way that Gettysburg is part of ours, and they know who they are in reference to this place. So Lainey comes home and she tells me about this and how awful it was, and said, "Is there something that you can do about it?" And little did I know, it took me 15 years. And really only recently has it been abundantly clear that yes, there was something. It was because it was going to be a state highway, but because fortunately it was crossing the interstate and had to have a connection to the interstate, the feds had to be involved. And there was something which at the time was called 4F that required that the damage that was going to be done to a protected property, historical property, damage was going to be done, had to be done, a study had to be done to show there was no feasible or prudent alternative to it. Now that sounds pretty powerful, but it hasn't been. You have to make those words work to accomplish their meaning. There are plenty of feasible and prudent alternatives to this, and no good justification of doing it to begin with, at least none that we could see. So we eventually got the feds on our side. We got the area designated as a traditional cultural property, which was a relatively new classification for historic preservation to recognize areas exactly like this. If you go around Macon, you'll see all these old houses, including the one that I live in, with the signs on them that it's National Registry. It's real easy to get large houses designed by well-known white men on the National Registry. It wasn't easy to get traditional cultural properties like this on the National Registry, and that's why the classification was created. So we got that done through the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We got, they were on our side and listed as one of the 10 most endangered areas in the country. We got the National Park Conservation Association to list the Okmulgee as one of the 10 most endangered parks in the nation. We got national support for it. And most importantly, we worked in I hope, a respectful way with Muskogees, who had not been dealt with well. And we got the assurance privately of the feds that they were going to pay attention to what the Muskogees wanted. Now, the Muskogees, that meant, well, let me say it this way. In the past, the Muskogees have been manipulated by people, powerful people and rich people in Macon, who would buy elections in the Muskogee Creek Nation in order to control the decisions of Muskogee. And they tried that out there. So part of this ended up being political campaigns out in Oklahoma to get people elected who respected Muskogee history more than they did money. And you had to convince Muskogees, convince the council that there was some chance of success, which is hard to do given their history. Mm-hmm. They had not been successful in opposing things like this in the past. They get blown off. There's formal compliance with consultation, and they get blown off. And we had to convince them that they had a chance of success. It was hard to do. And some of the things, though, the people who were trying to push this road through worked to their own disadvantage. They did some things that are very stupid. One is the language that they used in comments to the paper and stuff like that, like we're going to put these Indians in their place and the like, gave me what I needed. The other thing is that they invited members of the council to come here. In the process of doing that, we uncovered a bribe that was offered to two members of the council in the form of scholarships to Mercer to their kids.
Really?
Yeah. And this is a felony under federal law dealing with treatment of Native Americans. It all backed off quickly when we put a little light on it. But they also, they brought them here and they did their dog and pony show and the like, but they had so little knowledge of the people they were dealing with, the circumstances. So they take them out to the sheriff's firing range out here. And they use that as a gathering point. They're going to have a helicopter fly in, and the helicopter is going to fly them over the region. Well, the traditional, historical preservation officer, and who was very powerful alpha male, his father had been a medicine man, and that doesn't mean just dealing with health issues. It's like a shaman in their culture. And I think he was one too, Alan Cook. He knew, and I knew, that the way the sheriff's firing range got there is that they sent a bulldozer out there one day and destroyed a mound, a crucial one. So flying them out from the sheriff's firing range, which just adding insult to injury. So they helped us. The fact that they were trying to manipulate the elections out there helped us. All of the stuff that they did helped us. There was a historic preservation officer of Georgia who knew that we were doing the right thing, who put his job on the line about it, and the designation of this as traditional cultural properties and so forth, and got fired as a result. Fortunately, the Historic Preservation Officer National Association got wind of this, brought a great deal of negative attention on the governor who fired him, and found him a job immediately in Washington that was a better job and much better paid. So it had a happy ending, but we didn't know that was going to have a happy ending. Anyhow, I can go on at great length about this, Pat. Let me tell you what's happened. We defeated the highway. You never know for sure that you've defeated it, but it's about as dead as the highway could be. A former student of mine, Brian Adams, who's state court judge here and who was one of my assistant coaches at Vine Ingle, from whom I also learned a lot of baseball. Brian picks up on this cause. I always said that the purpose for defeating the highway is to put the monument back together, 2,000 acres. Things were moving in that direction. Jim David out there at the monument had eventually got the money for a study to be done for the incorporation of lands around it. We worked with the Archaeological Conservatory who owned part of those lands and with private landowners, and there were some lands that were in mitigation, which I won't go into, but it was possible to put all this together. And he got the money for the study and so forth, and this was all happening, just wonderful. Initially, it got put on hold because people hadn't given up on the freeway yet, but it finally was clear to people that it wasn't going to work. And so local politicians, everything else now got behind this. Well, Brian sees this, and he says, why stop there? This entire area, the entire corridor going down the river, down to Hawkinsville, is unique, a valuable resource. Valuable historically, valuable environmentally, valuable archaeologically, valuable economically. Brian had set up a canoe rental service, he and his brother going up and down the river, and just because he wanted, Brian didn't need to do this. He spent weekends shuttling people back and forth, and he's got his own law practice going on. He did it because he wanted people out to see this. So Brian we should expand this. We should have a national park and preserve. The preserve means that hunting will be allowed. We're not doing battle with hunters, don't want to. Hunters should be on our side. And my last year of teaching the spring semester, before this I'd gone half time, I got the faculty to approve a experiential learning course. And I wish that it would continue, because the idea I got primarily from Tom Glennon, and it's being done over the main campus, but I wish it continued here. You brought in students, you interviewed them and selected them to be part of the course. Couldn't just sign up for it, they had to go through interviews. And you pick a local project that lawyers can be involved in and contribute to, and you work on that. It's the project of the course. So the course, the learning, arises out of that experience. It was my job to see that the learning went on. So I met with Brian, and I said, I got this course approved, and I want to take on what you're doing. Well, he was thrilled about that, and agreed, and I wouldn't have done it without it, to be the president of the organization if we set it up as a nonprofit to get this done. Well, that was one of the best things I've ever done. Brian is just so wonderful. Just thinking of Brian and the work that he does, both in his lawyering and this project, and the kind of person that he is just the most uplifting thought I can have. He's just a wonderful young man. He and his partner, Jerome Gautreau, are just beautiful people and so committed to Macon and to. So we got the students to set up a nonprofit. The students all took various areas that would justify this so that the pitch could be made to others. They examined the implications of the transfers of the land, especially the mitigation lands, environmental mitigation lands. Did an awful lot of research on it, did research on the hunting licenses and everything else. Put all this together, did a pitch. We invited people as prospective board members, did a pitch to them at Brian's office, and out of that arose the Okmulgee National Park and Preserve Initiative that is doing extremely well. And while it would be something close to a miracle for it actually to succeed to create a national park and preserve, those are very, very difficult to do. There are maybe 6 or 7 organizations that are trying to do that and have been for years. My goodness, Brian is, if it requires a miracle, Brian is the one who could provide it. So I'm just thrilled.
Yeah.
They've already acquired, not into a trust form, hundreds and hundreds of acres. They've already been funded in various ways by very good organizations. And it looks like that the monument is going, the study is completed, it was approved and the like, and while the Congressional Act is required, the congressmen are behind it, it does look like the monument's going to be expanded to 2,000 acres, which for me would have been enough, but it just adds impetus to what Brian is doing to keep it going. So I feel very, very good about that. and especially about, obviously, what Brian is doing.
Mhm. And the 15 years of your involvement, uh, you stopped the highway. That's the main thing.
So that's, yeah.
Which makes all the rest of it possible.
Well, that's what they told me. So
Yeah, that's
mine was the negative side. I had to stop the bad guys. They get to be the good ones.
fair enough. While we're talking about Macon, and there's a lot of history that's part of that story. And you've been in Macon a long time. And I thought I'd take this occasion to ask you, it's really a big question, but I'm interested in your reflection on it, how the city has changed.
It is so much better now than it was when we came.
Tell me why.
Macon right now is a vibrant, interesting town. There are many years I always loved Macon. It's always it's always been weird, and I think much of Georgia thinks of it as weird. It had kind of a weird culture in it. It did for years. I mean, it did back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and the like. Macon has always been a literary town, and of course a musical town. There's always been a strong art community in Macon. But Macon was weird, and it was going through times of bad politics and racial divide and the like. Macon, right now, things are running as smoothly as they ever have. The government is, part because of consolidation, not fighting with each other in the way. The parks and recreation stuff, just to use one minor example, not minor, parks are important to us, much better than they've been at any time since we've been here. You see positive things happening. You see new buildings going up. You see lofts downtown. You see new restaurants downtown. You see a music scene that is, especially classical music, that other communities would dive to have. Mm-hmm. The Center for Strings and all of the various events that go on at the music school. It's you've got the Theater Macon downtown. You've got the Macon Film Guild. You've got the various art galleries, and I just think Macon is an exciting place to be. Mm-hmm. You've got people like Brian. You've got people like our own Sarah Gehrig, who keep it alive. Mm-hmm. You've got the College Corridor that, despite huge odds, seems to be working. Mm-hmm.
You really can't talk about the history of Macon without talking about race. Do you sense, as a longtime resident here, that has much improved?
Better. Oh, dramatically. Yeah, very dramatically. In quiet ways. There's still obvious tensions in politics, and the communities, the black and white communities, are not nearly as sharply divided, even politically, as they once were. The spillover in both directions. But the quiet ways is people working together, friendships. I guess we had been here maybe 10, 12 years. Lainey was teaching at a public school, and we were getting ready to go to some formal occasion where she had to get dressed up, and she didn't have a dress. And one of the other teachers came up to her and quietly said, "No, you and I are about the same size. I have one. If that's okay with you." Lainey had no idea what she meant. And she said, "Well, let me try it on." And this person, whose husband is on the county commission, after Lainey said, yeah, that's perfect for me, said, was just amazed, because she was black and Lainey was white, and she didn't think a white woman would wear a black woman's dress.
Well, a generation ago,
yeah,
it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. But now, I mean, you go to restaurants and you see that people sitting at tables are mixed races, that they work together, they get to know each other in personal ways, that they have each other over to their houses, that It's just an enormous accomplishment. Yeah, probably what this country has done best, I would think. Yeah.
Jack, I want to take one more break,
Okay.
and then we're gonna wrap up. I've got a few other things I want to ask you about, and,
Okay.
and then we'll finish up. But
Okay.
make sure
Thank
we,
you.
Okay.